Saturday, 7th December 2024, at approximately 4:55 p.m. Emergency services were called to a residential address in Pinewood, near Ipswich, following a report that a woman had been stabbed inside her own home. Then, 8 months earlier, police received another report of suspicious activity involving a boat and a vehicle near the river in Southampton, leading to the discovery of a large quantity of Class A drugs. And our third story involves a stolen vehicle used to force entry into a jewellery shop, followed by panic and obvious misjudgment with confusion and a rapid police response. Each incident occurred in a different part of England, each involved different motivations. And in every case, the individuals responsible believed they would get away with it. This is the story of 3 crimes and how each investigation uncovered the truth behind them. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Before the events of December 2024, Elliott Mallett was a 24-year-old man living in Ipswich, Suffolk. He resided on Hawthorne Drive in the Chantry area, a short distance from where the later attack would take place. On the surface, there was nothing to immediately distinguish him from thousands of other young men living in the area. That picture began to change once police gained access to his mobile phone. Analysis of Mallett's device later revealed a pattern of online behavior that investigators described as deeply concerning. His phone contained extensive material showing a strong fascination with weapons, violence, and extremist right-wing ideology. This was not limited to casual interest. Officers found repeated examples suggesting fixation rather than curiosity. Among the most disturbing discoveries were multiple videos we will discuss in a few minutes. Alongside this, investigators uncovered numerous selfies taken by Mallett himself. In these images, he posed with weapons and imitation firearms, often deliberately framed to project aggression. Several photographs were taken against backgrounds featuring political imagery, including posters linked to right-wing ideology. The images were used by the prosecution to demonstrate a consistent pattern of violent interest and self-image. Moreover, his phone activity reflected repeated engagement with violent content, reinforcing the view that this mindset had been developing over time rather than emerging suddenly. What investigators would uncover next had nothing to do with who Elliott Mallett was, but with where he chose to act and who was about to cross his path. The victim of the attack was Sharon Farthing, a 48-year-old woman who lived on Admiral Road in the Pinewood area on the outskirts of Ipswich. She was a mother to a 7-year-old son, though on the day of the incident she was at home on her own. Ms. Farthing's background was well documented during the trial. She joined the Royal Navy in 1995 and later went on to work as a personal trainer. In 2005, she joined Suffolk Police, serving for several years before later becoming a lifestyle coach. Her career history reflected a life built around discipline, physical capability, and public service. That physical fitness would later prove significant. The court heard that Ms. Farthing was physically strong and trained with a particular interest in boxing. The sentencing judge would later state that he believed the outcome of the attack would likely have been fatal had she not been so fit and able to resist her attacker. The setting of the attack was her own home on Admiral Road, a quiet residential street in Pinewood. Ms. Farthing later explained that her first sense that something was wrong came from a subtle change in the house. While upstairs, she felt a breeze moving through the property. At the time, she believed this meant her friends had arrived early for their planned Christmas meal and had opened the front door. Moments later, when she went to check, she noticed a shadow moving in the living room below. It was then that she realized someone was inside her home and left the upstairs room and went to investigate. What happened next unfolded within seconds and would transform an ordinary December evening into a violent confrontation inside the one place she should have been safest. Elliott Mallett entered the property unlawfully while Sharon Farthing was upstairs. There was no indication that the door had been forced, and the intrusion went unnoticed at first. As she moved onto the staircase, she came face to face with Mallett. The confrontation happened suddenly and at close range. Without warning, he produced a knife from his clothing. The weapon was later described in court as an 8-inch carving knife. Mallett immediately launched an attack. Ms. Farthing was stabbed a total of 8 times. The wounds were inflicted to multiple areas of her body, including her neck, face, hands, shoulder, and leg. The injuries were serious and life-threatening, and the judge later stated that the outcome could have been fatal under different circumstances. Despite her injuries, Ms. Farthing fought back. Using her physical strength, she kicked out at her attacker, causing him to lose balance and stumble. This allowed her to break free and escape from the house. She ran outside and sought help from a neighbor who raised the alarm and contacted emergency services. As Mallett fled the scene, he took several items belonging to the victim. These included her gym bag, a bottle of moisturizer, and a pair of earphones. Witnesses later reported seeing him run away in the direction of Ellenbrook Park, just a short distance from the house. But the violence inside the home was only the beginning, because what Mallett did next would draw police attention in a way he did not expect. A short time after fleeing the scene, Elliott Mallett reappeared, this time approaching police officers who were already searching the area around Ellenbrook Park. Rather than avoiding officers, Mallett made a calculated decision to initiate contact. He told officers that he had just been the victim of an attempted knife-point robbery. According to his account, he claimed an unknown man had attacked him, thrown him to the ground, and tried to stab him. He alleged that he had injured his hands while attempting to grab the knife during the struggle. At this stage, officers treated him as a potential victim. Body-worn camera footage captured this interaction in real time. In the footage, Mallett can be seen calmly describing the fabricated attack, providing details about an assailant dressed in dark clothing with a hood. However, as officers continued to speak with him, inconsistencies began to emerge between this account and other information they were receiving. Following the growing number of inconsistencies in his account and the evidence recovered from multiple locations that we will talk about in a few minutes, police made the formal decision to treat Elliott Mallett as a suspect rather than a victim. That decision marked a clear shift in the investigation, moving it firmly toward building a criminal case against him. In the early hours of the following morning, officers returned to Mallett's address and placed him under arrest. This allowed investigators to lawfully seize his mobile phone and carry out a full search of his home. From that point on, the investigation accelerated. When officers seized items of clothing for examination, his behavior changed noticeably. He began to visibly shake as his jacket was taken for forensic testing. This reaction raised concerns among officers who were already questioning aspects of his story. At the same time, officers searching Ellenbrook Park made significant discoveries. A bottle of moisturizer and a pair of earphones were found discarded in the area. Both items matched the description of property reported missing from Ms. Farthing's home during the burglary. Further evidence quickly undermined Mallett's claims. Doorbell camera footage from his own home showed him leaving earlier that afternoon, wearing black clothing, with his hood up, matching both the victim's description of her attacker and the description Mallett himself had given of the person he claimed robbed him. Nearby, officers also recovered a knife close to the victim's address. The weapon was engraved with the words "Maggie Soups." When police later searched Mallett's home, they found another knife in a kitchen drawer bearing the same distinctive engraving, strengthening the forensic link. Digital evidence proved decisive. Analysis of Mallett's mobile phone placed him at Ms. Farthing's house just minutes before the emergency call was made. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been attacked elsewhere in the park and left little room for alternative explanations. But the most disturbing fact of his character was documenting acts of animal cruelty from his own mobile phone. These recordings showed animals being deliberately harmed in various ways, including beheadings, animals being struck with weapons, and animals being burned, indicating intentional recording rather than accidental exposure. Mallett was subsequently charged with attempted murder and aggravated burglary. He pleaded not guilty to both offences, and the case proceeded to trial at Ipswich Crown Court. The trial lasted just over 3 weeks, during which jurors heard evidence from police officers, forensic experts, digital analysts, and the victim herself. At the conclusion of the trial, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Mallett was found guilty of both attempted murder and aggravated burglary, rejecting his version of events in its entirety. With the lie exposed, the final stage of the case focused on sentencing and on the long-term consequences of a crime that came within moments of becoming fatal. During the sentencing hearing at Ipswich Crown Court, the judge described the attack in stark terms, calling it unprovoked, shocking, and brutal. The court emphasized that Mallett had entered the victim's home armed with a knife and made a conscious decision to use extreme violence rather than flee. The judge also issued a broader warning to the public, highlighting the catastrophic consequences that can arise when doors are left unlocked, particularly during the darker winter months. Police statements following the sentencing underlined the rarity and severity of the offense. Senior officers described it as exceptionally unusual for a stranger to carry out such a violent attack inside someone's home. They praised Ms. Farthing's courage, both in fighting back during the attack and throughout the investigation and trial process. At sentencing, the court imposed a severe punishment on Elliott Mallett, reflecting the gravity of the offences and the danger he posed. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with an additional 5 years to be served on licence following his release. The court ordered that he must serve at least 20 years of his sentence before becoming eligible for parole. With the first case concluded, the focus now shifts away from a single home in Ipswich to a far larger operation, one involving international routes, organised crime, and drugs worth tens of millions of pounds. The second case centers on a 7-man organised crime group responsible for a large-scale cocaine importation plot uncovered in the summer of 2024. The men were Stephen Lawler, Daniel Bowen, Stephen Locke, Rice Stanley, Kieran Farrell, Sean Feenan, and Thomas Walker. All 7 later admitted their roles in the conspiracy. Although the operation came to an end in Southampton, the network itself was geographically spread. Several of the men were based in the West Midlands, particularly Solihull and Birmingham. Thomas Walker was from Pwllheli in Wales, while investigators established wider criminal links extending to Glasgow, the Republic of Ireland, and Dubai. These connections highlighted that the group was not operating in isolation, but as part of a broader international supply chain. Each man had a defined role within the operation. Stephen Lawler was identified by the prosecution as the organizer, overseeing the planning and onward movement of the drugs without physically handling them. Thomas Walker acted as the skipper, piloting the rigid-hulled inflatable boat which was the main source in their operation. We will talk about this in a few minutes. Daniel Bowen functioned as a quartermaster, tasked with scouting locations and supporting the transfer operation. Rice Stanley served as the driver, responsible for transporting the drugs once they reached land, whereas Stephen Locke handled logistics and expenses, including booking hotels and paying costs connected to the operation. Kieran Farrell acted as on-ground surveillance, providing extra eyes during the transfer despite being banned from driving. Sean Feenan's role was more limited, but he was involved in the maritime side of the operation and followed instructions issued by others. Prosecutors told the court that the group had direct connections to South American drug cartels and their intermediaries, placing them at what was described as the top end of criminal offending. The scale of the shipment, the level of planning, and the international links all pointed to an operation designed to supply organised crime groups across England throughout 2024. With the network established and the roles defined, attention turns to how this group planned to move hundreds of kilograms of cocaine across international waters, and why they believed the operation would succeed. The operation was carefully planned and designed to avoid early detection. Prosecutors told the court that the group intended to use a container ship travelling through the English Channel as the initial delivery point. Rather than docking at a port, large quantities of cocaine were transferred into the water in floating packages, a method commonly used to reduce the risk of interception. To collect the drugs, the group deployed a 13-meter rigid-hulled inflatable boat, RHIB. This type of speedboat was chosen for its stability, speed, and ability to operate discreetly at sea. The RHIB was piloted under cover of darkness, with movements timed to minimize visibility and avoid maritime patrols. Prosecutors described the logistics as deliberately secretive, relying on nighttime travel, coded communication, and precise coordination between those at sea and those waiting on land. Once the cocaine reached the UK coastline, the plan was to move it quickly inland. We will talk about this in a few minutes. This highlighted that the smuggling attempt was not an isolated shipment, but part of a wider network supplying drugs across England. The financial incentives for those involved varied by role. Some participants were promised large cash payments, while others were offered alternative compensation. For example, Thomas Walker was promised ownership of the boat as payment. Sean Feenan was motivated by debt clearance, with the expectation that his involvement would wipe out existing drug-related debts. Rice Stanley later told officers he expected to earn £50,000 for just a few days' work, underlining how lucrative the operation was meant to be. In total, the cocaine involved in the plot was estimated to have a street value of between £44 million and £64 million, placing it among the largest drug seizures linked to a single operation in the region that year. But despite the planning, secrecy, and money involved, the entire operation would begin to unravel not at sea, but on land when the drugs finally reached the shoreline. The operation moved into its execution phase on 8 July 2024, when the group attempted to bring the shipment to shore. During the evening, activity began to unfold along the River Itchen, specifically in the St. Denis area of Southampton. What the group had not accounted for was the presence of local residents. People living near the river noticed unusual and suspicious activity involving a speedboat and a vehicle near a block of flats. Concerned by what they were seeing, reports were made to police, setting events in motion far sooner than the smugglers had anticipated. Shortly after, the rigid-hulled inflatable boat, RHIB, docked along the river. Bales of cocaine were offloaded from the vessel and transferred to a waiting van. Police response officers arrived in the area and intercepted the van as it attempted to leave. When the vehicle was searched, officers discovered approximately 150 kilograms of cocaine inside. Further searches of the RHIB itself uncovered additional packages, bringing the total quantity seized to more than 600 kilograms. The cocaine had been packaged in 25-kilogram bales, a standard format for large-scale international trafficking. Investigators later confirmed that CCTV footage captured parts of the unloading process, showing bales being transferred from the boat into the van. This visual evidence would become a key part of the prosecution case, clearly documenting the handover and the roles played by those involved. With the drugs seized and one suspect stopped at the scene, investigators now had a foothold, but uncovering the full scale of the network would depend on what they found next. Specialist officers then boarded and searched the boat. Further bales of cocaine were recovered from the vessel, confirming that the smuggling attempt involved far more than what had been loaded into the van. This step established that the drugs had arrived directly by sea and that the operation had been carefully coordinated between land and water. A wider investigation was launched almost immediately, led by the Southeast Regional Organised Crime Unit working alongside Hampshire Constabulary. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from mobile phone data recovered from Stanley's device. Analysts extracted call records, messages, location data, and contact links, which allowed investigators to identify the other individuals involved and map out their roles within the network. Financial and logistical records added further detail. Hotel bookings, travel arrangements, and expense payments were traced back to members of the group, supporting the prosecution's claim that the operation was organized and pre-planned rather than opportunistic. Investigators also uncovered evidence of false number plates and the use of stolen or disguised vehicles, which had been deployed to reduce the risk of identification during the transfer. As the evidence base grew, arrests followed. Some members of the group were charged in July 2024, while others were arrested and charged in August 2024, as police worked through the intelligence and secured sufficient proof against each suspect. By the end of the summer, all 7 men connected to the operation had been identified, arrested, and linked directly to the attempted importation. With the full network exposed and the evidence stacked against them, the case now moved from the riverbank to the courtroom. As the investigation concluded, all 7 men were formally charged and brought before the court. Each defendant faced serious criminal allegations reflecting both the scale of the operation and their individual roles within it. All 7 were charged with conspiracy to import cocaine into the UK, an offence carrying significant custodial sentences due to the quantity involved and the international nature of the plot. 5 of the men, Stephen Lawler, Daniel Bowen, Stephen Locke, Rice Stanley, and Kieran Farrell, were also charged with conspiracy to supply a Class A drug, reflecting their involvement in the planned onward distribution of the cocaine. There were differences in the additional charges faced by some defendants. Kieran Farrell admitted possession of criminal property and 2 counts of driving while disqualified. These offences related to his role on the ground during the operation and his breach of existing driving bans. Other defendants faced charges connected to their use of vehicles, logistics, and support roles within the conspiracy. When the case reached court, all 7 defendants entered guilty pleas to the charges brought against them. These pleas removed the need for a contested trial and allowed the court to focus on sentencing and the seriousness of the offending rather than determining guilt. During proceedings at Winchester Crown Court, the prosecution described the group as top-end criminals. Prosecutors emphasized that the operation involved darkness, secrecy, and a high level of planning, with clear links to international drug suppliers and organized crime groups. The court was told that this was not a reckless or disorganized attempt, but a calculated effort to move hundreds of kilograms of cocaine into the UK market. In assessing the case, the court highlighted the scale of the operation, the sophistication of the planning, and the potential harm that would have resulted had the drugs reached the streets. These factors would play a decisive role in determining the length and severity of the sentences that followed. With guilt established and the seriousness of the plot laid out in full, the final question before the court was how to sentence men involved in one of the largest drug smuggling attempts of the year. At sentencing, the court imposed lengthy prison terms on all 7 men, reflecting both their individual roles and the collective scale of the operation. Stephen Lawler received 16 years and 6 months, Daniel Bowen was sentenced to 15 years, and Stephen Locke received 13 years and 6 months. Thomas Walker was sentenced to 14 years and 3 months, whereas Rice Stanley received 10 years and 8 months, Sean Feenan was sentenced to 10 years and 2 months, and Kieran Farrell received 12 years, alongside additional penalties for driving-related offences. Together, the sentences amounted to more than 92 years in prison. With the second case concluded, the focus now turns to a very different kind of crime, one driven by speed, force, and misjudgment, unfolding in broad daylight on a quiet Surrey street. The third case centres on 2 men identified by police as repeat offenders, Matthew White and Benjamin Brazil. Matthew White was 30 years old at the time of the offence and lived in Addlestone, Surrey. Benjamin Brazil was 38 years old and was based in West Drayton, West London. Both men were already known to police prior to the events of January 2025, and neither was new to the criminal justice system. During court proceedings, investigators and prosecutors described White and Brazil as career criminals. This label was not used lightly. Police stated that both men demonstrated a clear pattern of offending behaviour, acting with little regard for the consequences of their actions or the impact on victims. Their criminal conduct was framed as habitual rather than opportunistic. Brazil's history was of particular concern. He was already subject to previous driving bans at the time of the offence, yet continued to drive regardless and get additional charges but we will talk about this later in this video. White also faced dangerous driving charges, reflecting the reckless manner in which the offence was carried out. With the offenders identified and their backgrounds established, attention now turns to how the crime began, starting with a stolen car and a moment of intimidation that set everything else in motion. The events that led to the ram raid began on Wednesday, the 29th of January, in Addlestone. Earlier that day, a red Mini Cooper was parked locally, with its owner sitting inside the vehicle alongside a friend. Without warning, two men approached the car and opened the rear doors, climbing into the back seats while the women were still inside. The sudden intrusion immediately changed the situation from routine to threatening. Police later confirmed that the men demanded the women get out of the vehicle, creating a moment of intense fear and uncertainty. Faced with the prospect of escalation and unsure what the men might do next, the women fled the car in fear, prioritizing their personal safety over the vehicle itself. As soon as they exited, the men took control of the Mini Cooper and drove off from the scene, leaving the victims shaken but unharmed. This carjacking was not an isolated act of theft. It was the first deliberate step in a chain of events that would unfold over the next several hours. One that would see the stolen vehicle used as a weapon to force entry into a business premises. Several hours after the carjacking, the stolen vehicle was put to use in the next phase of the offence. The target was Brooklands Jewelers, located in West Byfleet. By this point, the area was quiet, but not empty. Witnesses later described watching in shock as the red Mini Cooper pulled up outside the jewelry shop. What followed was sudden and violent. The vehicle was reversed repeatedly into the shop front, with the driver using force rather than finesse to smash through the glass. Each impact weakened the frontage until the window finally shattered. As soon as the opening was created, the offence shifted into a smash and grab. One of the men jumped out from the rear passenger side of the car and reached through the broken window, grabbing items from the display area inside. Watches and jewelry were taken in quick succession and thrown into the back of the Mini Cooper. The entire raid was carried out with speed and coordination. There was no hesitation and no attempt to linger longer than necessary. Within minutes of the window being breached, the men were back inside the vehicle and accelerating away from the scene. Witnesses were left stunned by how quickly the attack unfolded and how brazen it appeared in a public street. But the speed that helped them escape the shop would not protect them for long, as police were already responding and closing in on the route they had taken. The police response was swift. As reports of the ram raid came in, officers were immediately dispatched to the area, quickly identifying the stolen red Mini Cooper as it fled from West Byfleet. A short pursuit followed, moving through the nearby area of New Hall. The chase did not last long. Realizing they were being closed in, the offenders abandoned the vehicle, leaving the Mini Cooper behind and attempting to escape on foot. The sudden stop and dash indicated panic and poor judgment as they ran into surrounding residential and green areas with limited options for concealment. Given the violent nature of the offence, using a vehicle as a weapon, police escalated their response. Armed officers were deployed to ensure public safety and to manage the risk posed by the suspects. The area was quickly secured, with officers coordinating containment while specialist units moved in. What began as a fast, aggressive getaway ended abruptly, with the offenders separated from their vehicle and exposed. As the search intensified, police turned to specialist resources to track the fleeing suspects through the surrounding area. With the suspects now on foot, police deployed specialist resources to prevent them from escaping. Police dog Vinny and his handler were brought into the search almost immediately. Using scent from the abandoned vehicle, PD Vinny picked up a trail and began tracking through the surrounding area. The scent trail led officers through pinewood allotments, an area of sheds, footpaths, and dense cover that offered potential hiding places. Vinny followed the route with precision, guiding officers directly to a shed where the two suspects were hiding. Armed officers were present as the shed was approached, reflecting the seriousness of the offense and the potential risk involved. The two men were located inside and arrested without further incident, bringing the immediate search to an end. At the same time, a second police dog, PD Oakley, was deployed nearby to search for discarded evidence. Working independently in the surrounding woodland, Oakley located a pillowcase hidden among bushes. When officers examined its contents, they found watches and jewelry matching the items stolen from Brooklyn's jewelers only hours earlier. The recovery of the stolen property provided crucial physical evidence directly linking the suspects to the ram raid. Combined with the abandoned vehicle and witness accounts, it closed the gap between the offense and the arrests. With both suspects in custody and the stolen items recovered, investigators now had everything they needed to move the case into the courtroom and place the full weight of the evidence before a judge. Following their arrest, Matthew White and Benjamin Brazil were formally charged with burglary and theft of a motor vehicle. White also faced an additional charge of dangerous driving, while Brazil was charged with driving without due care and attention, driving without insurance, driving without a license, and vehicle interference. These charges reflected not only the theft itself, but the serious risks posed to the public during the offense. The case was heard at Kingston Crown Court, where both men appeared for sentencing on Monday, the 6th of October. During proceedings, the court considered the rapid escalation of events. In closing statements, police praised the teamwork across multiple units, highlighting the coordinated response involving uniformed officers, armed response teams, dog handlers, and investigators. Police also acknowledged the role of the public. White was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison. In addition to the custodial sentence, he was disqualified from driving for 3 years following his release. Brazil received a sentence of 4 years and 2 months in prison, along with an 18-month driving ban upon release. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK crime documentaries.